Hi everyone and welcome back to my channel. Sorry that it has been over 2 weeks since I have posted a video, but to be honest with you, sometimes on my days off, I just don't feel like filming, so I don't. Also, I've kind of been dreading filming the video that I am coming back with today, which is my January wrap-up, because frankly, I just did not have a very good January reading month, which is kind of unlike me. Like, usually in January, I have like a burst of reading motivation, and it usually ends up being like one of my best reading months of the year as far as quantity, but also usually quality. I read some pretty decent books in January, whereas this year, not only did I not read very many books, but I also didn't enjoy a whole lot of the books that I read, or they were all very much kind of middle of the road books, which are my least favorite books to talk about. Like, I'd rather talk about books that I passionately dislike than talk about middle of the road books, and that is what this video is going to be. So without further ado, let's just dive right into it. As per usual, apologies for like the lighting seeming very like overexposed, as well as I'm still figuring out where exactly in my house I want to film. So the background is like a little bit messy at the moment because I wasn't planning on filming here, but like things have happened in the living room that are making it difficult with the lighting, so here we are. So yeah, let's just jump into the 4 books that I read in January. 2 of them are just like regular fiction novels. One is a graphic novel, and then one is nonfiction. So we're gonna start off with the 2 like regular fiction books that I read, starting with The Midnight Library. This is something I would consider to be like adult magical realism, I guess. In this book, we're following our main character who at the beginning of this book unfortunately decides to take her own life, and she ends up finding herself in this place like in between life and death that is called the Midnight Library, and each book in this library is a different life that she could have lived depending on different choices that she made throughout her life. So we get to see her pick up these books and see what her life would have been like had she made some different decisions throughout her life. I had heard some really great things about this book, so I was very excited to pick it up. I thought that the concept of it was really interesting, so I had some great expectations for this book, and unfortunately they just weren't really met for me. There were 2 main problems that I had with this book. One was that the main character, for me at least, was just very sort of annoying and unlikable, and that just made me not really care what happened to her throughout the story, which I know seems very harsh, but that is the truth. The other big issue that I had with this book was actually the ending, and because it's the ending, I can't really elaborate on it too much because I don't want to spoil you, but this is the kind of book where it kind of goes without saying the trigger warnings. Like, you got from the synopsis of this book whether you think that this is a book that you should be picking up or not. And I have always said that I don't ever really pay attention to trigger warnings when it comes to books because for whatever reason, not so much in movie form, like movies will get me at the drop of a hat. Like, I'm so sensitive to anything that happens in a film, like seeing things visually, whereas in book form, I'm completely desensitized to everything. Like, I can read some of the worst things and it doesn't faze me in the slightest. So I went into this book thinking I wasn't going to have a problem with it, and as far as the whole beginning, middle of the book, I didn't care. And then the ending happened, and the ending is like supposed to be the kind of more hopeful, like inspirational part of the book, and yet it was that part that put the dark thought into my head. And I know that it's very much like a me kind of thing because so many other people have read this book and super enjoyed it and said that it was very, you know, inspirational or whatever. But for me, I personally found the ending to be borderline problematic, and so I don't want anybody else to go into that as well thinking it's going to be something that won't bother them like I did, and then having the ending happen and like the good things that happen at the end is what puts not so good thoughts into your head. And like I said, I'm trying to be really vague about it, and this is definitely not me saying that anybody should be concerned for me. Like, I'm very much over it. I've dealt with these kinds of things for a very long time, and I can recognize when they happen and then they get put out of my head. But yeah, it was just something that happened at the end of this book, and yeah, I thought it was borderline problematic, so it kind of ruined anything that could have been good about the first half and middle of this book. The only things that I really did appreciate about this book was I did think that the concept of it was very interesting. It definitely was a bit thought-provoking for me personally. Like, I started to think back of like these massive turning points in my life of like certain decisions that I've had to make. Like 2 years ago, I had the store that I was working at had gone out of business, and I had like several different job opportunities, and so it really made me think back of like what would have happened had I said yes to that other job. Like, somewhere else out there, I'm like running a toy store right now. Like, it was very thought-provoking, that part of the story, but unfortunately the ending, like I said, kind of ruined the whole rest of the concept of the book. And then this also had very short chapters, which I also appreciate. I don't think there's enough short chaptered books in the world, and the short chapters definitely helped me actually finish this book, because my dislike for the main character, like, if it wasn't for the short chapters and me reading the book kind of quicker, I think I probably would have DNF'd it. So yeah, those are my thoughts on this book. I feel like that was very long-winded and hard for me to explain and borderline controversial, so I hope you take what I say with a grain of salt. Okay, moving on, we have Where the Drowned Girls Go by Seanan McGuire. I believe this is the 7th book in the Wayward Children series, so if you're not familiar with this series, the first book is called Every Heart a Doorway, and it is a portal fantasy series about this school for children and like teenagers that have gone through portals to other worlds like Wonderland or Narnia or those kinds of places, and then they come back to this world and they sort of struggle to adapt back into the normal world, and they really want to get back to that other world. So there's this like school for those children where they can wait for their door to open again so that they can get back to that other world. All of the books in this series, they tend to kind of flip-flop around as far as the timeline, so sometimes we're following the continuous timeline starting with the first book, other times we get like origin stories to some of the characters and see them going to their worlds for the first time. The last book in this series, which I think was the 6th one, which was called Across the Green Grass Fields, I think is what it was called. That was marketed as like a good jumping on point for new readers. And this book, I'm pretty sure, takes place directly after that book, because the main character of Across the Green Grass Fields is like a side character in this book. But in this book, we are following a main character called Cora, I believe is her name, and she was in some of the previous books. I'll be honest though, I didn't super remember her character when I jumped into this. Like, it took me a hot second to remember who she was, but I do think that you should read the other books. Like, I know it says that the last book in the series was a good jumping on point, but I think you should just start at the beginning if you're new with this series. And besides, Every Heart a Doorway is, to me, the best book in the series, and they've all not quite lived up to the first one. But the concept of this book is that Cora has actually gone through 2 doors into different worlds, and she actually really wants to forget the last door that she went through and the world and the things that she found there. And so she's at this school where they are very much encouraging everyone to like hold on to that world so that one day you'll get back to it, but she wants to forget it. So she asks to be transferred to this other school where the concept of it is to kind of get you back into the normal world and forget that that world ever happened, and kind of encourages you to pretend like it never sort of existed. So she ends up going to this other school, and then things are not quite as they seem at this school. So it is a very short book, so I don't want to tell you like too much about it because everything happens kind of quickly. But I ended up giving this book, I think I gave it 4 stars when I originally rated it, but looking back, I'd probably give it 3.5. I think this is probably my 3rd favorite book in the series. Like I said, Every Heart a Doorway is my favorite, and then In an Absent Dream is my 2nd favorite, and this one will probably be my 3rd. I think my biggest issue with this book, which is an issue that I've found in all of the books for the most part, is the lack of world building. So I thought that the concept of this other school was really interesting, and I really hope that we'll explore more of it in the future novels, but I feel that there was an atmosphere that wasn't utilized. Like, this school had the potential for a great setting, but like we never get descriptions of anything, and I really was disappointed in that because I love atmospheric sort of books. Besides that, to be honest with you, which is why I ended up dropping my rating from a 4 to a 3.5, I don't really have much else to say about this book because all other aspects of it I just kind of found to be good, but not like anything spectacular. So the characters, like I said, I couldn't super remember the main character from previous books. I did recognize Reagan, who was the main character of in Across the Green Grass Fields, and I did enjoy seeing what her character has done since that book, and I hope that we get more of her character in the future. But like, as far as the plot of this book, it did kind of feel like a middle book, where like the next book, this is kind of a setup for the next book, I hope, because like I said, I really want to explore this other school. So yeah, again, I don't know if I explained my thoughts very well, but this is also the 7th book in a series, so I don't want to talk too much about it in case you have no idea what any of the other books are about. So then I will quickly talk about the nonfiction book that I read, which I read as an ebook, so I'll post a picture of it here. But it was called Don't Overthink It by Anne Bogle, I think is the author. This is a nonfiction sort of self-help book about overthinking and tips and tricks that you can do to reduce the overthinking in your life to lead like a simpler, happier life. Ironically, I spent the majority of my time reading this book overthinking whether I should DNF it or not, because this book was just too simple for the kind of overthinking that I do, and I probably shouldn't have assumed that this was going to be the kind of book for my type of overthinking, which is very much like anxiety, OCD, intrusive thoughts kind of overthinking, whereas this was like deciding whether you want to buy flowers at the grocery store or not because you don't need them, but it would be nice, or like what to have for dinner, or like having a capsule wardrobe to help you reduce your outfit choices so that you don't overthink what you're gonna wear in the morning. Like, this is just not the kind of overthinking that I do, so this just wasn't a helpful book for me, but perhaps it will be a helpful book for you. So overall, I think it was like a fine book. It just wasn't the book for me, so I didn't give it a rating because it didn't really feel fair, but overall, it was fine. If you're wondering how I ever came across reading a book like this anyway, it's because this author wrote a different book that is about books, and I wanted to read that book, so I looked it up on my Overdrive app, and they didn't have that book, but they had this one by the same author, so I thought, oh, I'm an overthinker, I'll pick this up, and yeah, it didn't work for me, but maybe it'll work for you, so that's that. Finally, we have the graphic novel that I read in January, which was the Umbrella Academy Apocalypse Suite. So this is the first volume of the Umbrella Academy. As you guys know, I've wanted to get into reading more graphic novels. I thought I would pick up this one because I'm already familiar with the Umbrella Academy from the TV show. Turns out, however, that this graphic novel is actually not like drastically different, but like different enough for it to confuse me, okay? It's different from the TV show. So I just didn't super vibe with the art style of this book, or the writing for that matter either. There's a lot of action scenes in this book, which, I mean, I don't know what I was expecting, but I kept getting very confused during those moments because they would be like shouting out these directions that weren't adding up with what's happening on the page, and I just personally found myself getting confused with the characters. Like, sometimes I couldn't even tell Allison apart from, like, sometimes I thought Allison was a dude because she's just not overly feminine in this depiction of her, whereas like Vanya in here is very sexualized in this book. So yeah, I kept getting confused with everything that was happening, and I was a little bit disappointed because Klaus is my favorite character in the TV show, and now I'm wondering if he's only my favorite because I love Robert Sheehan. But in this book, actually, my favorite characters were Pogo and Number 5. I really enjoyed some of their interactions together, and just Pogo in general with all of them, especially when they're like kids, I think is so sweet, and I love monkeys and apes, so I love Pogo in this book, and I think we get a little bit more out of his character in this graphic novel than we necessarily do in the TV series, at least for me. So yeah, I think I'm still going to pick up the second volume and see how that goes now that I've already been introduced to like the writing style and the art style, but just from this first one, neither of those things were really for me. So we'll see how the second one goes, but with this one, I just found it to be a little bit confusing, and I wasn't overly keen on the art style. Like, this is one of the action pages, and there's just a lot happening on here, which is a lot for me being new to graphic novels, as you know. So yeah, those are the 4 books that I read in January. Like I said, I was pretty disappointed with how little I read, which I know like 4 books, as of how my reading has been lately, is actually pretty decent, but one of them being a graphic novel and one of them being like a nonfiction book, and the one of them basically being a novella, it just doesn't really feel like a lot, especially in comparison, like I said, to other Januaries where I would read like 10 books. So yeah, those are all of the books that I read in January. Leave me a comment down below. Have you read any of these books? What did you think of them? I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye!